who's actually going to get the most out of an 86-inch TV, and who would be better off walking away? Is it a home theater upgrade that finally makes movie night feel cinematic, or just a massive screen that ends up being a pain in a small living room? And for the average buyer wondering whether the price tag is justified, the real question is, does the extra size and the new mini LED tech translate into everyday value, or are you paying for hype? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When you walk into a store and see an 86-inch panel, the first thing that hits you is the sheer presence of it. It's not a TV you hide behind a couch, it becomes the focal point of the room. That's why the biggest hesitation for most people is space. You need a wall that can accommodate the dimensions plus a bit of breathing room for ventilation, and you have to think about the viewing distance. For a screen that large, the sweet spot sits around 10 to 12 feet away. If your seating arrangement keeps you closer than that, you'll start to notice the pixel grid, even with a 4K resolution, and the experience can feel less immersive. On the flip side, if you have a dedicated media room or a large family room, that size can turn a regular TV night into something that feels like a private theater. The LG QNED85 series brings together mini LED backlighting with quantum dot NanoCell color tech, all driven by the A7 Gen 5 AI processor. In practice, that combination shows up in two main ways: brighter highlights and deeper blacks, and a color palette that stays vivid even in bright rooms. I've spent a few evenings streaming a mix of HDR Netflix dramas, a couple of gaming sessions on a next-gen console, and a Sunday afternoon watching sports with the blinds open. The brightness pushes past 1200 nits in HDR scenes, so the ball on the football field doesn't look washed out when the studio lights are on. The black levels stay impressively deep, which makes nighttime scenes feel cinematic rather than muddy. For gamers, the AI processor does a decent job of upscaling lower resolution titles, and the low input lag while not measured with a lab rig feels comparable to other mid-range 4K TVs, making the experience smooth enough for fast-paced shooters. One of the most practical strengths of this TV is the built-in Alexa voice control. You can tell it to turn the volume up, switch inputs, or even dim the lights in the room if you have a compatible smart home ecosystem. The voice response is quick enough that it feels natural, and it removes the need for a separate remote for those occasional "what's the weather" queries. Because the TV runs LG's WebOS platform, you get a fairly straightforward interface for the major streaming apps, and the AI processor learns your viewing habits to suggest content. In real life, that means after a week of watching a lot of true crime documentaries, the home screen starts surfacing similar titles without you having to hunt for them. But there are trade-offs that show up once you live with the unit for a month. First, the mini LED backlight, while delivering better contrast than a regular LED panel, still uses a zone-based dimming system. In very dark scenes with fast-moving objects, think a flickering candle in a horror movie, you'll sometimes spot a faint halo around the edges, a phenomenon called bloom. It's not a deal-breaker, but it's something you notice if you're sensitive to that level of precision. Second, the size brings a weight penalty. The 86-inch model is roughly 120 pounds, so wall mounting it requires a sturdy mount and a couple of strong hands or professional installers. If you're planning to move it around, that heft becomes a hassle. So who should consider splurging on this 86-inch QNED? If you have a dedicated media room, a large open-plan living space, or you're an avid home theater enthusiast who already invests in a sound system, the size and the mini LED performance will likely feel worth the cost. The TV shines brightest when you can sit back at the recommended distance, let the brightness cut through ambient light, and use the built-in voice features to keep the remote clutter low. It also works well for families that binge series together. Everyone gets a clear, vibrant picture without needing to squint. On the other hand, if you live in an apartment, have a modest viewing area, or are a casual viewer who mostly watches TV shows from a couch a few feet away, the 86-inch panel could feel overwhelming. You might end up spending more on a wall mount and possibly a soundbar just to get the experience you want, and the bloom effect in dark scenes could become a minor annoyance. In that case, a smaller QNED or an OLED with true pixel-level dimming might give you better overall satisfaction for less space. Another practical consideration is the future-proofing angle. The A7 Gen 5 AI processor supports upscaling to 4K, but the TV does not offer 8K, and while HDR10 and Dolby Vision are supported, the content ecosystem for